2008's World Rugby Junior Player of the Year. Back in those days, it was called the IRB Junior Player of the Year. It was after the inaugural Junior World Championships, which, if you've got a memory, which I certainly didn't, goes all the way back in the days when they used to have under 21s and under 19s competition. So yeah, let's have a look back at the winner of that competition. Well, that award, it was Luke Braid. Luke Braid, not exactly a household name, I would imagine, in the world of rugby. I think he's probably pretty familiar to most people in New Zealand rugby, maybe a bit in French rugby, but outside of that, I would have thought perhaps not so much. I've picked the 2008 one because he was the first guy to get this award in its current form. Obviously, there are other guys who got junior awards under the old systems, but we'll start with this one. So have a look at his career, I guess, how well it matched up to the expectations of winning the award of Junior Player of the Year. And I'll compare him to some of the other guys who you may have seen around since that 2008 Junior World Championships. So 2008, New Zealand won the Junior World Championships 38-3 over England. Braid is the guy who gets named the Junior Player of the Year for that year. So it's a pretty big deal. A lot of expectations, as I mentioned. And sure enough, he comes back to New Zealand. He gets himself into the Mitre 10 Cup, which I would have thought is nowadays back in those days would have been the NPC. Or was it the Air New Zealand something? It always changes its name, but basically the competition below Super Rugby level. So it's the breeding ground for a lot of the guys who get into Super Rugby teams. So he plays for Bay of Plenty, which is his kind of home province, and eventually he cracks the Chiefs wider training squad. So it's kind of a standard pathway on your way to becoming a professional rugby player. Eventually, from the wider training squad, in 2010, he gets into the Chiefs squad proper, and he gets 9 caps with the Chiefs. From there, he signs with the Blues, where he spends pretty much the rest of his time in Super Rugby, wearing this kit and that kit. Some of my older Super Rugby jerseys and whatnot, some of my original ones from back when Luke Braid was with the team. And it's fair to say his time with the Blues wasn't during it wasn't their best years. If you're not familiar with Super Rugby, the Blues last won the competition in 2003, and the last time they made the playoffs, I think, was his first year with the Blues, so that was 2011. The Blues made the semi-finals of that one, losing to the eventual champion Reds. So that was a pretty good season to be playing with the Blues, but from then, 2012... they finish outside the playoffs, 13 outside the playoffs. That's maybe one of his best years for the Blues, because he goes on to get the Blues Player of the Year, so within the club, Blues Player of the Year, and he gets selected for the Māori All Blacks. As far as I'm aware, he plays 2 games for the Māori All Blacks, one against Canada and one against the US. But I guess he's putting himself in that kind of picture in terms of maybe getting selected for the national team, the All Blacks. And there were stories around about that time of whether he would get selected or not, especially with any time Richie McCaw was injured. Because if you didn't know him, I haven't actually mentioned it, he played open side flanker. Pretty much his specialist position. I don't remember him playing other positions. He may have shuffled around the back line, but as far as I'm aware, it was pretty much always 7 for him. Known as a big-time tackling player, huge work rate and getting through loads and loads of tackles, bit of a pilferer. That's kind of the mould that he's cut from. Blues Player of the Year 2013. 2014, he goes and steps another step up and he captains the side for 2014. But he does suffer, I think, an ankle injury or foot injury towards the end of the year. And apparently that will go on to haunt him a little bit, because from what I've read about his time after he leaves New Zealand, it seems to have reared its ugly head a bit. His final season with the Blues is 2015, and like 2014, 13, and 12, they finish outside the playoffs. He's not captain for 2015. They replaced him with Jerome Kaino, but I would say partly that's because in 2014, It was already known, it was announced that he was leaving the Blues after that year. So the 2015 was always going to be his final year for the Blues. And I guess that's probably a reason. Plus, Jerome is a massive figure here in Auckland and Blues rugby anyway. So yeah, he ends up playing 70 games for the Blues in 5 seasons. I made it to be 70 out of a possible 82. So he played the majority of the games. I think it's like 85%. Played 85% of Blues games, scored 9 tries. Like I mentioned, he was captain in 2014. And he announced he was going overseas to play for Bordeaux. He did it, I guess, kind of a smart time, because he had been, I searched as much media as I could for Luke, and there's one thing he did as a promo for these guys, BNZ, talking about money, and he talks about wanting to make sure by the time he finishes his playing days, he's kind of set himself up financially. Well, he signs a contract with Bordeaux end of 2014 to start in the 2015 season. And it's prior to a World Cup. It's prior to World Cup 2015. So he knows after the World Cup there's going to be a lot of players coming off contract. So he gets in a step ahead of everyone else, and I guess manages to get himself the best deal he could. He was probably, I think, 26 at the time, going on 27. So he basically spends the prime of his career with Bordeaux. I didn't really follow him once he left New Zealand, to be fair. I didn't hardly watch any top 14 as it is now. I certainly watched even less back then. But from what I've seen, his initial period was pretty good with Bordeaux. I think he played 40 odd games in the first couple of years, because he was with them from 2015 to early 2019. I think he left in January 2019, so halfway through the season. And he only played 48 games in total for Bordeaux, all competitions. So 41 in the first 2 years, and then so 2015, 16, 16, 17, and then only a handful of games after that. So from what I've read, it was a nagging foot injury that kind of kept him largely on the sidelines and unable to keep playing. So he scored, they reckon, this is according to Bordeaux's website, 2016-17 was his best season, played 24 games, scored 3 tries, and those are the only 3 tries he scored for Bordeaux in his whole time there. So, only 5 games in the season which he left. In January 2019, he asked to be released from his contract early. As I said, he only played 5 games in that season. So by mutual consent, they terminated his contract 6 months early. So I guess he probably could have kept taking a paycheck, but he wanted to come back to New Zealand. The club said it was for family reasons. As far as I'm aware, that's the end of his rugby career. Aged 30. So a lot of guys, would have still been cracking on at that age. But as far as I'm aware, he must be retired, because it's been pretty hard to find information on him since leaving Bordeaux. In terms of his career itself, I think pretty tough position to be playing in those years that he was in New Zealand. I mean, he's probably seen as a little bit light for that position here in New Zealand, because like I said, he was an open side flanker. I think from what I read, he was always floating around 100 kgs, maybe just under, so quite mobile, but not necessarily the biggest guys. Where you look at like Richie McCaw, Sam Cane, Adi Save, who was coming through, Matt Todd, all those guys are 100 plus kgs. So he's probably 5 or 10 kgs a bit light for maybe getting into the All Blacks frame, but he was a huge tackler. There was one season that he was like one of the top tacklers in Super Rugby, I read. Always, I think, in the mid-90s in terms of his tackling percentage, so really high. And Rugby Pass reported on it. Sanzar named him in their Super Rugby away team of the decade. Now, their stats teams are a bit hit and miss, but apparently he made 40 turnovers and 350 tackles in 36 away games in that last decade gone. So he certainly got through a lot of work rate. The Blues were a losing team, so he probably would have had to do a lot of defending. But that being said, from my watching the Blues games, they often had plenty of possession and territory. They just couldn't convert their chances, so it's not like they were always on the back foot. But yeah, probably seen as a bit light, like I mentioned, and a lot of depth in that number 7 jersey in New Zealand. Would you say he lived up to his expectations as the Junior Player of the Year? Probably not, because you would at least expect to crack your national team, go to a World Cup, be the number one in your position, that kind of thing. But, I mean, that's not to throw any shade at the guy, because he still became a Māori All Black, which, apart from getting in the All Blacks wider training squad and not getting called up, which I don't think he did. I think Māori All Blacks is as close as he got. It's about as close as you can get to being an All Black, and that's closer than the majority of anyone who's ever tried their hand at rugby will get from New Zealand. And he still made a proper career out of being a rugby player from when he first, cracked on in like 2008, 2009 Mitre 10 Cup, all the way to 2019 when he finally called it quits. So, full-time rugby player, would have earned a bit of money, would have seen the world, and, done more than I would say a lot of people get. But again, it's pretty hard with the expectations of World Player or Junior Player of the Year. Other players from that 2008 side that beat England in the Junior World Champs from the All Blacks, there's a couple of big names, or a few. In the starting lineup, Sam Whitelock and Ryan Crotty were playing. Those guys are more like household names, I would have thought. Aaron Smith was on the bench. Sean Maitland was also playing. I think he was on the bench as well. Ended up going to play for Scotland. Other guys in the England side, Alex Good and Ben Youngs were playing in that team. But when you look at the Welsh team, like, it was loaded with talent. It had Jonathan Davis, Lee Halfpenny, Reece Webb, Dan Bigger, Sam Warburton, Justin Tipperick. Like, it had loads of guys who, if you'd look back and thought World Player, the Junior Player of the year 2008, would have seemed a bit more fitting in hindsight. But again, it's hard to judge with a guy who's, under 20 years old, how far he'll go depending on the performance he's putting at that age. Again, maybe the size back in those days when he was at that junior level wasn't so much of a thing, but maybe at the test level it would have been a bridge too far. Hard to say, because there's other guys who punch above their weight as well. So it's an interesting one. Like, winning that 2008 competition may have actually been his kind of biggest win, biggest trophy of his career. A lot of guys, obviously go on to win national titles or cups or whatever, but at least he got that one. The last I saw of him was on a Facebook post where someone said it's great to have Luke Braid attending our training session, and that was at the Inside Running Rugby Academy in Tauranga here in New Zealand, which is where he's originally from. So if that's true, I can only assume that he is back here in New Zealand, back where he is, originally from in his kind of hometown. So that's kind of a cool story that he's come back to NZ. Like I said, it's a bit of a tough one to live up to that potential, but he still had a good crack at it. Maybe a bit small for the international game. But had a big engine on him, was certainly a stalwart for the Blues for a few years, so it was a favourite of mine. And there's plenty of articles from around his time at the Blues saying he's only a matter of time where he's going to crack the All Blacks. What else does he have to do? But Richie McCaw's injured. They've gone with Sam Cane. They've gone with Matt Todd. Sam Cane seems to be the anointed one and whatnot. But still had a pretty good career. Just not an international one. Anyway, guys, there's still a few more other guys. 2009 was a good one. I might have a look at that at some point. But that's Luke Braid. Interestingly, for the 2008 one, they didn't seem to have any other nominees. They just picked him. But with the subsequent years, they had like at least one winner and a couple, or maybe 3 or 4 other nominees. So that'll be interesting to go over and compare how those guys matched up as well, the nominees to the guys who actually ended up winning it. But that was Luke Braid from 2008. You guys let me know your thoughts on his career, if you remember, any kind of special moments and whatnot. And I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.